Tobago is a small island with a vast history that stretches back thousands of years, long before the arrival of Europeans, where the first human inhabitants, known as the Ortoiroid, settled along its fertile coastal plains and river valleys, bringing with them tools fashioned from stone and shell and the earliest forms of agriculture that allowed them to thrive in an island environment that could be both generous and unforgiving. And through their presence, they laid the foundations of human occupation that would evolve over millennia, leaving behind traces in the form of middens, pottery fragments, and the remnants of simple shelters that reflected ingenuity and adaptability. And as these small communities grew, they developed social structures and cultural practices that connected them to the rhythms of the land and sea, hunting, fishing, and cultivating root crops. And their lives were organized around family groups and seasonal cycles that dictated movement, resource collection, and the observance of ritual practices, which in turn preserved communal memory and established early traditions that would influence later societies, showing that even in the earliest periods, Tobago was a land shaped by human interaction, environmental knowledge, and cultural expression. In the centuries following the Ortoiroid settlement, the island saw the arrival of the Saladoid peoples, who introduced new methods of agriculture, more elaborate pottery designs, and increasingly permanent settlements, crafting homes and communal spaces that reflected a deeper understanding of both social organization and material culture, while their diet expanded to include cultivated manioc and maize alongside fishing and hunting, demonstrating an adaptive integration with the islands. Ecosystems and their decorative arts, pottery with intricate motifs, and ritual objects reflected both a spiritual dimension and the desire for identity and status, revealing that early Tobagonians were not simply surviving but cultivating culture, trade, and connections with nearby islands. And over time, the Saladoid influence merged with or succeeded earlier communities, creating a layered human presence that combined technological ingenuity with spiritual awareness, establishing trade networks that extended to other islands and forming the foundations of social cohesion that would withstand centuries of change and upheaval, showing that even prior to European contact, Tobago's people had developed complex cultural systems deeply intertwined with their environment. The Arawak peoples arrived later, bringing more sophisticated forms of agriculture and permanent settlements that strengthened Tobago's early societies, introducing new crops, pottery styles, and trade practices that connected the island with a wider Caribbean network, and their communities were organized with more clearly defined leadership structures, which guided labor, rituals, and seasonal activities, demonstrating social and political sophistication, while their spiritual beliefs tied them closely to the land, the sea, and celestial phenomena, fostering myths and oral histories that explain the origins of rivers, mountains, and stars, preserving cultural memory in ways that allowed traditions to persist even as populations shifted, and their interactions with earlier inhabitants facilitated the blending of customs, practices, and knowledge, creating an enduring cultural foundation, which shows that Tobago's earliest societies were dynamic, adaptive, and capable of long-term survival, with an identity shaped by both continuity and innovation. And this period of pre-Columbian settlement reflects resilience, ingenuity, and a deep respect for natural and spiritual forces that structured daily life, social relations, and the relationship with the wider Caribbean world. By the late 15th century, Tobago had attracted the attention of European explorers, drawn not only by its fertile land but also by its strategic location, as Spanish navigators first approached the island in search of gold, territory, and trade opportunities. Yet the lack of precious metals meant that permanent settlement did not immediately follow, and the Spanish influence remained largely limited to sporadic contact, trade, and the documentation of indigenous communities, leaving most of the island's human landscape unchanged, while the indigenous populations continued their agricultural, fishing, and communal practices largely undisturbed, although their exposure to European diseases and sporadic raids began to create vulnerabilities that would intensify with later colonization. And these first encounters set the stage for centuries of competition among European powers, each vying to establish control over the island's resources, trade potential, and strategic position, initiating a period of profound transformation that would reshape Tobago's demographic, cultural, and economic life, while also laying the groundwork for a complex layering of identity that incorporated indigenous resilience, African endurance, and European imposition. In the 17th century, European interest in Tobago intensified as the Dutch, English, and French recognized its potential for plantations and strategic settlements, each attempting to establish control through fortified positions, small settlements, and the introduction of cash crops. But the island's challenging terrain, dense forests, and exposure to hurricanes made these efforts difficult and led to frequent changes in possession, creating a pattern of instability that defined colonial life. And during this time, enslaved Africans were brought to the island in increasing numbers, forced to labor under harsh conditions on sugarcane and other plantations. While indigenous populations were further displaced, their communities shrinking and their cultural presence diminished. And despite these pressures, African-descended peoples developed communities that preserved language, music, religion, and customs, ensuring the survival of cultural identities even within a system designed to erase them. While European settlers imposed their political structures, legal systems, and agricultural practices, creating a social hierarchy in which power and land were concentrated. Yet resistance persisted in subtle and overt ways through maroon settlements, everyday defiance, and the maintenance of ancestral knowledge. Tobago's natural environment played a significant role during this era, shaping settlement patterns, agricultural productivity, and defense strategies as rivers, forests, and coral reefs provided both obstacles and protection for those living on the island, with enslaved Africans and displaced indigenous peoples often using this terrain to establish independent communities and maintain cultural continuity, while European planters and colonial administrators sought to exploit these resources, clear land, and cultivate profitable crops, often underestimating the resilience and ingenuity of the populations they sought to control. And over time, a complex social and economic system emerged, defined by plantation agriculture, forced labor, and the interplay between European authority and African and indigenous resistance, demonstrating that Tobago's history was shaped not only by colonization but by the persistent agency of its human inhabitants. The island's shifting colonial status meant that control passed between European powers multiple times, with treaties, wars, and occupations leaving each generation with new rulers, laws, and social expectations. And this constant flux affected trade, labor, and cultural development, requiring adaptation and resilience from all communities, while enslaved Africans and their descendants retained practices of spiritual life, music, and storytelling that preserved memory and identity, weaving together traditions from Africa, indigenous practices, and European influence, creating a rich cultural tapestry that would become a defining characteristic of Tobago. And by the late 17th century, despite the turbulence, small settlements, plantations, and communities had become established across the island, each negotiating survival and continuity under conditions of coercion, scarcity, and uncertainty. And these experiences shaped the collective memory and identity of the islands population, laying the groundwork for social structures and cultural patterns that would endure well into the future. Economic life during this period revolved primarily around sugarcane, cotton, and other cash crops, with European planters relying on enslaved labor to generate wealth and maintain operations, while African-descended populations developed systems of mutual aid, cultural expression, and informal economies to navigate the constraints imposed upon them. And their ingenuity ensured that despite oppression, communities survived, adapted, and maintained cultural memory while European powers competed over trade routes, colonial dominance, and agricultural output, creating cycles of prosperity and decline, abandonment and reoccupation. And the legacy of this competition is evident in the diverse architectural, agricultural, and cultural imprints left across the island, reflecting the layers of colonial history that intertwined with resilience and adaptation. Religion and spiritual life also reflected this complex layering, as Christianity, introduced primarily through missionary activity, interacted with African spiritual practices and the remnants of indigenous belief systems, resulting in a syncretic spiritual landscape that persisted even under pressure, providing social cohesion, moral guidance, and cultural continuity. And through rituals, music, and communal gatherings, enslaved and freed populations maintained their heritage, celebrated seasonal cycles, and resisted full assimilation, ensuring that culture remained a source of identity and empowerment despite systemic oppression. And this spiritual and cultural resilience became a cornerstone of Tobago's evolving identity, bridging centuries of displacement, labor, and social change. The 18th century brought further turbulence, as Tobago continued to change hands between colonial powers, with Dutch, French, and British claims shifting repeatedly through warfare, treaties, and strategic settlement, each wave of control leaving behind fortifications. plantations, and administrative systems. While African-descended communities expanded in numbers and influence, and indigenous populations dwindled, their presence largely absorbed into or displaced by these transformations. Yet the social and cultural life of the island remained vibrant, reflecting a constant negotiation between survival, resistance, and adaptation. And despite political instability, communities developed localized governance, trade networks, and social cohesion, ensuring continuity and resilience even amidst the upheaval that defined this century. Even in the midst of colonial conflict, enslaved Africans on Tobago developed forms of resistance, creating maroon communities in the interior forests and along remote coastal areas, where they could maintain autonomy, cultivate crops, and preserve cultural practices. And these settlements became centers of cultural continuity, passing down stories, rituals, music, and spiritual practices across generations, demonstrating that even under extreme oppression, human agency and identity could not be fully erased, and these communities played a vital role in sustaining the social fabric, challenging colonial authority, and ensuring that African heritage remained central to the island's identity, shaping the cultural landscape that continues to define Tobago today. Plantations and European settlements remained vulnerable to environmental factors, including hurricanes, soil depletion, and pest infestations, which periodically devastated crops, altered economic patterns, and forced adaptation. And these challenges affected both planters and laborers, requiring resilience, cooperation, and innovation to survive and maintain production, while simultaneously influencing settlement locations, defensive strategies, and social organization. And over time, these environmental pressures combined with political instability to create a uniquely dynamic social and ecological context in which communities adapted creatively, maintaining continuity in culture and survival despite repeated disruptions, revealing the interplay between human action and natural forces in shaping Tobago's history. By the end of the 18th century, Tobago had developed a layered and complex society in which European colonial ambitions, African-descended resilience, and remaining indigenous influences intertwined, producing a unique cultural and demographic landscape. And despite repeated upheavals, the island's communities maintained continuity in social structure, cultural practices, and economic adaptation, reflecting resilience, ingenuity, and the capacity to navigate profound change. And this period of colonization and transformation established patterns of land use, labor, spiritual life, and community that would inform the social and cultural development of the island in the 19th century, highlighting the persistent agency of the human populations whose lives were deeply entwined with the island's environment, resources, and evolving colonial structures. As the 18th century closed, Tobago's population had become predominantly African-descended, with European planters concentrated in administrative and landholding roles, while indigenous communities had largely diminished or been assimilated, and the social hierarchy was defined by land ownership, labor exploitation, and European governance. Yet African-descended communities maintained cultural memory, family structures, and social networks. And through music, storytelling, ritual, and cooperative survival strategies, they preserved a sense of identity that would endure into emancipation, illustrating that even under coercive systems, culture and agency could flourish. And this historical resilience set the stage for the dramatic social, economic, and political transformations that would characterize the 19th century and beyond. The 19th century began with profound shifts in Tobago as the island transitioned from a system dominated by enslaved labor to one grappling with emancipation, social reorganization, and the restructuring of its economy. And with the abolition of slavery in the British Empire, formerly enslaved Africans sought to redefine their lives, reclaim land, and rebuild communities, navigating the challenges of limited land access, economic dependency on plantation owners, and the need to establish independent livelihoods while forming social networks, churches, and cultural institutions that reinforced identity, resilience, and collective memory. And these early post-emancipation years were marked by both hope and struggle, as freed populations negotiated freedom, cultivated small-scale agriculture, maintained spiritual practices, and preserved the customs that had survived centuries of oppression, shaping a new social fabric that reflected both continuity and transformation. The decline of sugar plantations following emancipation led to economic shifts, as planters struggled to maintain profitability and laborers pursued alternatives. And this period saw diversification of agricultural production, smallholder farming, and increased reliance on fishing and localized trade, while African-descended communities consolidated landholdings where possible and cultivated cash crops such as cocoa and coffee alongside subsistence staples, maintaining food security. And economic autonomy, and through these practices, communities reasserted control over their labor, resources, and cultural expression, embedding resilience and adaptation into the social and economic landscape, while European influence persisted in administrative structures, education systems, and legal frameworks, creating a complex interplay between inherited colonial hierarchies and emerging local agency. Education became an important focus in post-emancipation Tobago, as missionary societies and colonial authorities sought to instill literacy, religious instruction, and vocational skills, while local communities valued education as a tool for empowerment, social mobility, and the preservation of cultural knowledge, and schools served not only as sites of learning but also as centers for community gathering, collective organization, and transmission of values, ethics, and social cohesion, with church-affiliated institutions reinforcing spiritual life and communal identity, while simultaneously introducing European norms, creating a hybrid educational environment that reflected both imposed structures and local adaptation, shaping generations of Tobagonians who would navigate the challenges of post-emancipation society with resilience and vision. Throughout the 19th century, cultural practices flourished despite the lingering shadow of colonial dominance, with music, dance, storytelling, and spiritual traditions serving as vital conduits of identity, resistance, and communal memory, and African-derived practices persisted in ceremonies, festivals, and daily life, blending with European elements to create a uniquely Tobagonian cultural expression, while language, folklore, and oral histories preserved knowledge of ancestry, survival, and environmental awareness. And through these forms of cultural continuity, communities maintained cohesion, passed down ethical and spiritual frameworks, and ensured that the legacy of resilience endured despite systemic inequality, economic dependency, and the ongoing influence of colonial governance.